Hi, my name is Croal. I'm the founder and principal of Hit Detection, a boutique consultancy focused on video games and consumer tech. Before that, I was a senior writer for technology at Newsweek for 14 years.
Hi, I'm Lilit Marcus. I am the co-founder of Save the Assistants, a website where any assistant from any industry can anonymously submit horror stories about their bosses. I'm also the author of a book, Save the Assistants, A Guide for Surviving Your First Job, which came out earlier this year. And I'm the editor-in-chief of thegloss.com, a women's website owned by B5 Media.
Hi, I'm Irin Carmon. I'm a reporter at Jezebel.com, which is owned by Gawker Media. And before I was at Jezebel, I covered media and the luxury business and digital marketing as well at Women's Wear Daily.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, so to start the conversation, there's really two things that I want to talk about today. One of the topics we're going to be talking about is from an agency perspective, when our clients come to us and they tell us the story that they're trying to tell, the program that they want to execute, the first thing we ask them is, who is your audience? Who are you trying to reach? And the answers are either maddeningly vague, like women 24 to 50, or they come up with these kind of stereotypes in their head that I'm sure their ad agency or whomever has done all this research, and they say, oh, we want to reach urban youth, or we want to reach gamers, or we want to reach fashionistas. And so what we want to talk about today is how the disconnect between who the brand thinks they want to talk to, or who those people they think they are, and who they actually are. So I've invited people who are very deeply embedded within their communities to help talk about this. But to start with, my role at Ketchum, I have kind of become the de facto specialist in engaging women online. And what that has really meant has been engaging the so-called mommy bloggers or engaging the mommies online. And I think there are a few people in the audience who self-identify as mommy bloggers, and it'd be great to hear from them later as well. But I wanted to start off by talking to Lilit and Irin about when bloggers or when marketers are so focused on the quote-unquote mommies and the mommy bloggers, who are they missing in terms of women? Who's kind of falling outside that demographic?
Well, I mean, I would say that, you know, even just going back to what you said about we want gamers, we want urban youth, we have a really strong relationship with our audience at Jezebel. We're constantly, you know, we have tiered community systems, we have hardcore regulars, we have people who really feel comfortable expressing their intimate lives and opining on politics and pop culture and fashion all day. So one of the things that I've really learned from them is that they are really enthusiastic consumers, but they hate marketing. And part of the reason that they hate that is because they feel like all things that are sold to women are either, like you say, mommy blogging, or, you know, they're about how women love yogurt or want husbands, you know, are carefree in the tampon ads. I mean, one of the things that really resonated with our readers was this Kotex campaign, which was mocking, you know, a lot of these conventions of advertising. So it's true. I mean, the ways that people, you know, most of our readers don't have children. Either they're too young or they don't want children. And there's a whole world of consumption. You know, they're really interested in pop culture. They love fashion. They post the things that they buy on our open threads. So I definitely think that there's an untapped resource there in terms of people who they like to buy stuff, but they don't like the way it's being sold to them or they're not being addressed.
I think also I understand why marketers make some of the decisions that they do. I don't think anybody's job is easy. And, you know, since the bulk of my experience is working in editorial, I understand why for a marketer it's much easier to try and be as specific as possible about who the consumer is, because that at least gives you something to start with. But like Nancy pointed out before, it's really difficult, especially if you're trying to sell a campaign or trying to sell your boss on an idea that you have, to say, I want to reach women between 18 and 40. That doesn't really give people anything to start with, and that's really, really broad. So I understand why marketers start with these really small communities thinking that that'll give them something to start with. Unfortunately, the best and worst thing about the internet is that everybody has a voice on it. And it's very difficult to tell when there's a legitimate community that's not being reached and is using the internet to really speak out versus when it's a couple of people who have really outsized communities that they're part of. So I think it's incredibly difficult online to tell when something is really a big story or when a few people are talking a lot about it.
I'd like to ask, you guys all have such interesting and varied careers, but how do you self-identify? So do you consider yourself a blogger, a writer, a journalist, a community manager? And then how much of what you're producing online, how much are you thinking about your audience as the end state?
Well, I mean, I'm not really a journalist anymore. I mean, I have a column in this UK gaming magazine called Edge once a month. So mainly I just try to entertain. I've got about, I don't know, 14,000 followers on Twitter, and that's about all I have time to sort of, I can't really blog long thoughts now that I'm not at Newsweek anymore because I'm busy with other stuff. So I'm just really trying to entertain my audience. And I take the same approach to that audience as I did when I was blogging. I guess I also do a podcast that's kind of occasional called Out of the Game with some other people who got out of game journalism or doing other things. But the idea is really, I mean, it's my interests, right? So I'm interested in video games, I'm interested in sports, I'm interested in politics, and I just try to mix all that up. And different people are interested in different aspects of my personality. So, I mean, you know, I'm black, I'm male, I'm Canadian, I am a Laker fan, and I just mix all of those things up. I don't know that I really, at least online, strongly self-identify one way or another. And in fact, one of the things that I do, you know, is sort of question some of the things about each of those things, like, you know, what is it to be a gamer, and some of those things like that.
I did get a note from the audience. They would like it if we spoke into the microphones more.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Anybody else want to talk about how they identify?
Sure. I do think that because I'm the editor-in-chief of a website that a lot of people contribute to, occasionally my job is being a curator. And that means a lot of things. That might mean that I specifically assign stories to other people because I think there's something important going on and I'd like us to cover it. It means that I get to write my own things from time to time. But ultimately, it means that I spend a lot of my time reading our comment threads and reading stuff that our audience members send into the site and sort of try to guess what they like, what they're responding to, what topics they think we should be covering more. And that changes every day, but the best that I can do is try to curate a conversation between the people who write for our site and the people who read it.
Yeah, I would like to build on that because there's definitely such a big aspect of community management about our jobs. I mean, this is how, I work for a very analytics-driven company. We get bonuses based on unique visitors, which are, you know, new people that are brought in, so I'm thinking about the broader audience, but we also really, really care about the deep level engagement of our hardcore regulars. So I'm spending a lot of time, you know, making sure that the tone is right, taking out people who are just trying to make trouble. But then, you know, my background is in traditional journalism. I was a newspaper reporter, and so a big part of my job is trying to figure out how I can feed the beast when it comes to blogging, you know, and I consider blogging kind of building on things that are already out there and doing, you know, responses or analysis or commentary, and then journalism, which I consider to be, you know, bringing something new out to the world, making something original, whether that's from interviewing somebody or, you know, drawing something out from resources that are already there. So I think at this point, nobody is just one thing. I mean, none of us on this stage is one thing, and I would wager that a lot of people in this audience, too, their jobs have become much more hybrids. People who never had to consider these sorts of skills before are now having to take them on.
Well, going back to something that both Lilit and Irin were talking about, one is the curatorial function, and the other of just ordinary people, not necessarily people in media, and the other is, you know, not mistaking the loudest voices they're not necessarily all representative. Like, you know, there are silent majorities or silent minorities in all these communities, and so that's the interesting thing about the curatorial function of being on the internet is sometimes there will be parts of the audience or segments of the audience that you'll actually learn more about, not by what they're saying, because they may not be saying a lot of things explicitly, but by the things that they're liking on Facebook, by the videos that they're, you know, retweeting or things like that. You know, not everyone is necessarily motivated to speak, but people are curating. When you're forwarding on an email that you got with a funny joke, that is a curatorial function.
Right, and to build on that a little bit, I think I try to figure out what I do in certain situations in order to try and guess what my readers might do. And sometimes it feels frustrating when I get 20 comments on an article saying how much they don't like it, but I realize there were 10,000 views on that same story. So I know that I'm very guilty of, if I read an article that I really like, kind of in my head saying, yeah, that's great, and just moving on. And then when I read an article that I really don't like, leaving a comment about why I don't like it. So I think there's absolute validity to people who, because they like something or just don't want to share, they don't leave an opinion, and then you forget about them.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that is actually the accountability that you have to the people who don't like it when they have good reasons for it. So of course, you may get 150 angry emails, but it may have, 200,000 unique visitors, and they didn't all send emails or something. This is something that happened to us with the Duke the Duke playlist, and where we had our core readers were really outraged that we published it. But sometimes, thinking about what I would do or what our readers would do, sometimes I'm wrong about it. Sometimes I exclude them without realizing, because none of us has the totality of all these experiences. Sometimes, we published a guide to losing your virginity that my colleague wrote, and she didn't intend for it to exclude, for example, lesbian and trans people, but a lot of them wrote in and said, well, what is virginity for us, and why were we excluded from this? We thought this was an inclusive space. So she did a follow-up. All of a sudden, this sort of communication that we had, maybe that was a small constituency, maybe most of the people it really applied to them, but it didn't hurt us, it only enhanced us to be able to be responsive to them.
Yeah, and I want to talk to Irin a little bit about the Duke, we'll call it the Duke sex list. There was a question earlier this morning about how we can take things from the internet, how things kind of make the jump from online into the quote-unquote mainstream media. And if you're not familiar with the Duke sex list story, this is a story that Irin actually broke for Jezebel and then went on to the Today Show and MSNBC and all of that. And we were talking a little bit earlier about how the story broke and why it broke on Jezebel and maybe not a more traditional outlet. Do you want to tell that story?
Well, I think part of it is that traditional outlets want to wait until somebody else does it, because first they think it's too sleazy, and then they spend days talking about it. So it was fascinating to me that the story that we broke, that we ended up doing maybe 2 posts about at the time, was wall-to-wall broadcast media. I mean, I don't even know what they were saying about it. But more deeply, the way that we got that story first, and the reason we did, is we got it from somebody in the community who said, this thing is going to blow up, but I would rather that Jezebel write about it, because you guys are not going to, we use this expression, slut shame her. So she felt like, and she was right, that the commentary about this social phenomenon was going to judge the sexual behavior of the woman who wrote it and focus on how skanky she was. And we try to create an atmosphere of consensual sexual freedom where everyone's boundaries are respected. And so they thought, okay, well, here's a place that I trust, so I'm going to give them this tip, which wound up being, at this point, it's the highest trafficked post we've ever had on Jezebel in 3 years. Last I checked, there were 1.5 million new readers and 2.5 million hits.